personally, I think, you know, pictures speak louder than words. We'd like to think Fairview Farm speaks for itself. We look at it, and I think it says something to you. We hope that it does, as we think everything in Crete should. You know, things speak for themselves. You don't need to speak when you take pride in what you have, and a lot of us in Crete take pride in it. I look around here, I think I can say almost everybody does. It's here tonight that I know. See your homes, etc. That type of thing, which is so important. But don't worry about the West Nile virus, because first of all, this group is too young. Nobody will get it. We've only found 12 dead crows all summer. So they're body at all. Mentioned that they got me to speak because Jackie and Ray told me the way they were preparing everything to be perfect, that it was going to be President Bush here. If he couldn't make it, it would be Vice President Cheney, and at least, you know, Colonel Powell. But I don't see him. But the effort they went to for you folks, that's who I thought was coming.
They're figuring out the construction there. They'll be here.
Yeah, they don't know how to get in here. No. Maybe he'll come in his helicopter. Hopefully so. Okay. I just would start out with this little hay here, this tractor. My Uncle Ed, obviously my dad's brother, bought that tractor brand new in 1945. I refurbished it 2 years ago. And that was the first tractor that was ever permanently on this farm. I guess the sign is a little bit inaccurate. And my uncle farmed the farm at that time, 120 acres, with that tractor, 2-bottom plow, an 8-foot disc, little 8-foot harrow behind it, that type of thing, a 2-row corn plant. When I was in 8th grade, my grandfather Ferris went out and bought me a tractor just like that. Just across the state line in Indiana at a farm sale on a Saturday for $850. And I can remember driving it home. I was so proud of it. And we came up to First Street over the railroad track, you know, and I can remember taking it over the railroad track real slow, and it just purred like a kitten. But the reason he bought that tractor for me was he was a little bit impatient with it at getting some of the farm work done. So, Edward gets a kick out of that, I see. So we...
Edward, no!
So a couple of things he taught me. The first thing we did was we went out and planted corn. And I had that tractor just like that. We went out to the fence line out there. And my grandfather was on the horse-drawn corn planter, now with the tongue shortened, hooked to that tractor just like that. And told me to stay like 5 foot off the fence row to keep straight lines, okay? Well, if you look at my corn rows that I plant all over Crete today, you can see that he didn't teach me too well, or I didn't learn too well. I'm not known for straight corn rows. But then I worked for the Deutsches one summer, and Leroy Deutsch, if you know Lee's dad, he was quite a comedian. He had crooked rows. And he always told me, Bob, you get more seeds in a crooked row than you do a straight row. And therefore, you get more grain. But that's how my grandfather taught me how to plant corn with that 2-row planter. Then one other thing that comes to mind, you know, early crops on this farm, a lot of this farm was hay. This is not really a good farm with corn and beans. Basically is what we raise today sometimes. Wheat, it's very rolling, a lot of clay-type soils on the hills, gumbo in the bottoms, and it's really not a good corn bean farm. So my grandfather had a lot of hay, and of course they had cattle, livestock, that type of thing. But I used to take the tractor and pull the horse-drawn mower with the tractor, and he would ride the horse-drawn mower, and then he had to raise it up by hand with your foot. I'm sure Carol knows all of these things. But I guess the one memory I have that's most distinctive to me about that was one Saturday night, or Saturday afternoon late, we were mowing hay out there. And first of all, he'd gotten off the tractor about 3 o'clock, taking a hat off like Indian Rick has there, a little wider brim. And about every 2 hours, he'd put fresh clover in it. And he'd put it back on his head. That's how he kept his head cool. I never wore a hat, still never do. But that always stuck with me. That night at 5 o'clock, we were about done with this 7-acre field. There was maybe a 20-foot wide strip left. And there were a lot of pheasants baby pheasants running back into the hay. And we stopped, and he said, well, quick for today, Bob. And I said, why is that? He said, we'll leave that for the pheasants, and when we come back on Monday, they'll be gone. So he was certainly very conservation-minded, not only from the land standpoint, but also from the standpoint of the animals. And at that time, the bells started to ring. And I'm sure many of you knew this. I was never known it, but to this day, on Saturday evening at 5 o'clock, when I hear the Methodist church bells ring, I think of my granddad and myself out in that field, which would now be probably close to 50 years ago. And of course, those church bells still ring today at that same time. Just kind of some neat memories. If you follow that lane down there where the stone is, and you go on down it, that's a long grass lane, and it's tree lined, just like you see the trees here. And the reason for the trees were, this is something I don't remember, I just know that they would till the fields with the horses, and then, because there's no reason for that lane to be there with modern farming, it's really a waste of land from that standpoint, but they would rest the horses under the trees. And so and those trees, of course, still exist, and they're still there, and it's kind of neat to remember. I can remember the horses. I know my sisters can. I can remember the two horses. Bill and Caesar were their names. I can remember riding on a hay rack with my grandfather and my uncle being the horses pulling the hay rack. We used to pull the hay up into the barn with a hay fork, 8 bales at a time, with the horses. And I might have been 8 years old. They would unhook the rope, and then you'd pull it back by hand, you'd back the horses up, and you'd take another 8 bales up into the barn. And it would take us, Gene, and it probably took us an hour to unload a load of hay, and of course today with the elevator, we'd probably do it in just about 20 minutes. Okay. I know Mary and Ingo knows this, and any of you have come by here after a heavy rain, that this farm takes a lot of water. This farm wouldn't be farmable if it hadn't been the fact that my grandfather tiled it back in the 1930s. 5, 8-inch, 10-inch, and 12-inch tile.
Excuse me, Bob, but it was 1910.
You are correct. I told you they would have just very good. It was 1910.
Yeah, it was 1910.
So we're close to 100 years ago. What's amazing is those same tiles still work. We maintain them. As soon as we have a tile hole, we fix it. But they work very effectively. Marion can attest to, the water goes away. It wouldn't go away if it wasn't for those working tiles that were put in back in 1910. He was described as a progressive farmer at that time. Now, don't be offended. One man dug all this tile. Now, my mom and dad told me his name was Shitty. Isn't that true?
Yes, that's true.
It is. That was his name. Hard to believe, but anyway, we'll get beyond that. My dad would tell me how I can't dig up one tile. I get Victor Pietenbrink to come with his backhoe, okay, and dig it up so we can fix it. That man dug this whole farm with all these tiles, and I'm telling you, sometimes you have a 10-inch tile with 10 little tiles called finger tiles going out to the side. He did it all by hand. And my dad told me how he would see him down there and throwing that, with a spade, throwing that dirt out way up over his head. All done by hand by basically one man. My grandfather didn't do the labor, it was hired done. But all of this land was tiled and of course became a productive farm because of that. That corn crib over there has a little bit of interest. Bill Waiter, he likes that corn crib, right, Bill? Huh? Tell him about that corn crib, Bill.
That's a backbreaker.
When I went away to college, I always had an interest in farming. Bill was a good friend of ours and Karen, and still are today. But we were running the farm. My grandfather passed away. My dad really never did farm. And Bill used to help out. One year you picked all the corn.
Yeah, we used to live right across the street in Hotan's, upstairs in Hotan's house.
He picked all the corn with a one-row picker, and how did we get it in the crib, Bill?
Shovel it by hand.
Shovel it by hand, yeah.
Yeah.
And that crib holds about 850 bushel. Today with our combine, we do 850 bushel by half a day. we used to spend probably 3 days filling that crib, let it sit all winter, and then we'd have to get 3 or 4 men and shell it out in the spring, etc. Just a little bit of an example of the modernization of farming techniques. But
You still
we had a
use it,
crib.
Bob?
What's
Do
that?
you still use it?
Well, I was going to tear it down. Jackie insisted I didn't. She was right. Yeah, I use it today. It's mainly where I store my chemicals for spring.
Oh, no more corn then.
It's coming. No. We gave up shoveling it a while ago. But along with it, I should mention Leray's son, Johnny. I always got the nephews to unload the corn, but her son, John, holds the record for the most loads unloaded in one day. And we did 22 loads. We could put a load. We put a load over there, every other load there, every other load here. That load we had an elevator. We just raked it out. But here you had to shovel it. He did 11 loads in one day. And that more than half fell that trip. But everything went perfect. And he was in good shape then. Too bad he's not here now. I guess he ran. He's not in the shape he was. He certainly was then. Well, the other thing I'd mention about that tractor for you, I said 1945. Obviously, it's about 57 years old. If I started that tractor up for you, purrs like a kitten. It's the engine has never been touched. It's just amazing. It doesn't have much power. We've had to work on a magneto, and we never had the valve cover off until I had it painted. We put the valve cover on. Just kind of interesting when it's that old and it runs and starts it.
Is that the only red tractor on the farm?
We have one other one, but everything else is gone in the green. Yes. And, you know, so many people tonight said, gee, boy, this is a nice setting right here. Well, when my grandfather passed away in 61, 62.
61.
Come on, historians, 61? Anyway, it was at that point that my father and I took over the farm, and if you could see that, we should have pictures of it then, because this was a chicken yard with a chicken house, with chicken fences, and the weeds were this high, and there was all types of debris everywhere, and we began to clean it up, and etc. I dropped it. And of course, there were a lot of fence lines all through the farm. We tore them all out, that type of thing.
When it needed painting so bad, remember, Bob? The barns?
Well, yeah, we started to paint.
Yeah.
We paint now about we paint something every year. I haven't seen the movie Signs. How many of you have seen it?
What?
Marianne wanted me to go see it. My son said I wouldn't like it. I thought I'd like it because the farmer was in it, but he said it's not really what it's about. But that barn burnt in 1930, and it burnt for 3 days and 3 nights. My Uncle Ed was quite the hero. He led the animals out. He got 2 horses out and took them up here to the corner right here of 2nd and Columbia, and left them with some people. Went back, started to get some of the sheep out, except for the other animals, but they all went back. Those horses broke loose, went back into the barn, and every animal perished in that fire. Again, that lasted 3 days and 3 nights. Now that was right after the beginning of the Depression. I'm told that was an immaculate barn, ones that you see that have the cupola on the top. It was a dairy barn. You can see the foundation goes just halfway across there. There was a silo sitting right there in the south end. If you walked over there, because it's dry, you can see the foundation of the silo. It's a perfect circle. That's not anything unique, although I'm going to tell you a story about a circle in a minute. But that silo was there, but it being the Depression, they couldn't afford to rebuild the barn as it was. So that's all railroad car siding. And then they wanted to make a hayloft, a big hay barn, so they extended it about double the length. So the north half of that barn doesn't have any foundation. It just sits on wood posts that go down into the ground. But that's kind of, I guess, how that barn came about today. The roof on that barn, my grandfather was on it at 80. He was on that barn at the age of 80. On the peak, I myself can remember that. I've roofed that barn twice myself. I don't know if I'll be able to do it again or not. I'm sure he could have. But one of the interesting things about it, in 1980, I moved here in 1980, and September of 1980, some of you may remember a tornado went through. And I was at work at school, got the phone call. My dad was sitting right there in the driveway. The tornado touched the top of that barn. And as you look at it, the south end went like that. For some reason, that tornado backed off at the exact last second. It cracked the major timbers in the barn. You know, if it had gone another degree or two, it certainly would have gone over. But we were able to put tractors on it, come along, straighten it out, and put some new timbers in it. And just kind of interesting. But, you know, in all honesty, I have seen from time to time some circles in my own fields. And the one that is most, nothing like I see in the previews of the movie, but the one that brings the greatest memory to me is we were out in that field weeding soybeans. This had to be back about the time we moved.
Time on this farm. I didn't farm it, but Mr. Hendricks, who lived on Exchange Street just east of the Adams Cemetery, he farmed this land at that time. I don't know if he rented it or leased it or shared. I don't know what the situation was, but he farmed this land. They had 4 children, and the youngest boy, Gilbert, was a couple of years older than me. Millie probably remembers Gilbert and Alice. And I would tag along with him. We'd come over here where you're sitting, and Bob mentioned this was a chicken coop over here. This was an orchard. This was a complete orchard, starting way over almost by that French. Maybe it didn't come quite this way, but pretty close to where that tree line is down yonder there. One of the memories I have, young boys, when they grow up, they have clubs, you know. And there were 2, I believe they were probably pig sheds, and they were abandoned, weren't used anymore. They sat back in there. They were yay high or something. And it had the papers with it and everything, so we could roll our own cigarettes and think we were growing up, you know. But when we didn't have Fox, they opened it in this back road. Like you say, he was not a permanent resident. I don't know how many years he farmed.
You know what years those were? Never at all.
In the late 20s, here or afterwards, there were, I think, they had. He was taken. Marge was born in